Good evening, everybody. It's great to see you. I'm just gonna we're gonna put a quick announcement out there as I get started. Um, I was at the dentist today, so if I'm slurring words, it is because my face is half numb. So I'm just gonna do what I can. So yeah, you might notice that I'm not fully whatever. So I am having a bit of difficulty this afternoon. If you can hear the music, please let me know if it's too loud. I am still working on things. But yes, please let me know if you can hear it, if you can't, if it's too loud. Oh, thanks, Steven. Yeah, I'm numb, so it's really interesting to like try and drink water, that kind of stuff. All right. Let me get stuff situated over here. Okay. Well, that didn't work. Alrighty. I'm actually gonna turn the music down just a smidge. On my end, anyway. There we go. I don't want to blast my eardrums. Alright. So for those of you who have been here the last 2 or 3 streams, we were reading the first story in my arc called Reflections of a Padawan. That was written when I was 17, 18, and yeah, very funny. I cannot wait until I can have emotes in my chat. I am excited about that. Of course you're Celia. Alright. So, yeah, so the first story we were reading, starting Sunday a week ago, was called Reflections of a Padawan. It had 10 chapters. And tonight, the plan is to read the second story in her arc, which is called Prelude to War. It basically picks up almost right after Reflections of a Padawan. So please bear with me if I appear to be slurring my words or anything like that. I'm having a really hard time making words properly right now. So also, yes, I had to get a straw because trying to drink water the regular way was not happening. It was just not happening. So, yeah. Fun times. So, I hope everybody has some snacks and some water because we're about to get started over here. Oh, give me 2 seconds. I'm going to try flipping screens to see if that brings the music back. Give me 1 second. Did that help any? Please tell me. Okay. Please tell me if you guys can hear the music, or if you can't, I am still trying to fix it. It does not like me. Sorry. All right. Okay. I'm ready to get started if you guys are. All right. Okay. Okay. You guys are distracting me in chat, but that's okay. I hope everybody had a good Wednesday. The weather out here, it has been really nice, so I've been enjoying the fact that I don't have to wear a jacket when I leave for work in the morning. So it's very nice. All right, so we're going to get started with story number 2 called Prelude to War. It's relatively short. It's got 6 chapters. And so, if you guys are all set, we're going to get started. All right. Prelude to War, Chapter 1. The Senate was out for blood regarding the affair with the mobile suits. It appeared that none of the Jedi were safe from retribution. 2 weeks ago, General Din had taken Master Card into custody and placed him under house arrest for his actions following the discovery of outbound flight. He had since escaped, the better to compile evidence of his innocence. All of this passed through Callista's mind as she sat in meditation. The gardens of the Card home were soothing to her. The thoughts passed through her mind, but she did not latch onto them. Instead, they passed through her mind only to dissipate. A familiar presence intruded upon her meditation, and she smiled as she sensed Andrea enter the gardens. Andrea Card was a knight in her own right, receiving her knighthood shortly after Callista had. The young women had become fast friends over the short time that they had known each other. Callista smiled, remembering how she had felt a part of their family. General Din had opened her arms to Callista, offering her further training. She felt their relationship reflected more of a mother and daughter than a teacher and student. Ari had taught her many things, perhaps the most important being that grief is a necessary part of life. The cool evening air surrounded the house like a mother wrapped a child in a blanket. Dinner had ended an hour ago, and Callista and Andrea were in the kitchen helping clear the dishes. The other girl was full of energy and excitement. She talked incessantly of her friend, Edward DeGarmo, the heir to the Catani throne. Callista knew the Card family's connection to royalty well. Stefan's wife, Jade, was Catani nobility. Callista's mind still returned to that ill-fated fight with Mephisto all those weeks ago. What had caused him to go after her master? The Sith hadn't surfaced for years, and now here they were again. She knew it wasn't her place to go after the Sith. That was more Einar's area of expertise, but she felt things had been left unfinished after her battle with him. She knew she was the only one who could make them right again. She still had his saber, and she remembered an old technique one could use to find the location or origin of the weapon's owner. She had no idea if it would even work now that the weapon's owner was dead, but it was worth a shot. The fields behind the Card home were damp and cool as the darkness of night closed around her. Holding the hilt flat across her palms, she held it out towards the night sky. The saber began spinning like a compass needle. It wavered slightly and then stopped. It was pointing in the direction of Korriban. That's unusual, although it was a distinctly Sith base. She turned and ran for her X-Wing, the dew soaking the hem of her cloak. I'll find them and report back to the council if I don't get myself killed in the process. The canopy closed over her as she began the pre-flight. She was halfway through when she sensed him. A second later, her comm crackled to life, and it was Einar. Callista, you shouldn't go out there alone right now. She slammed her fist down on the comm panel, cutting him off mid-sentence. He didn't understand. She had to do this alone. Drifting upwards on repulsors, she guided the X-Wing from the hangar into the open air. Pointing the craft's nose upward, she engaged the sublights and shot into space. It took her a few moments to pull Korriban's location from the navigation computer. The stars blurred around her as the ship shot into hyperspace. A wave of coldness swept over her through the Force. This is it, she thought, as she pulled the lever and dropped out of hyperspace. A debris field floated off to her left, which the computer identified as the ashes of Kor. Guiding her ship down through the atmosphere of Korriban, she had to fight the cold. It was interfering with her instruments. Her engines sputtered. She barely brought the noser for the X-Wing up in time to keep her from slamming into the ground below. The jolt of landing threw her against her crash harness, and she bumped her head on the forward canopy. Grabbing a rebreather, she palmed the canopy release and exited the X-Wing, using the Force to partially bury the fighter in the snow. After she had done so, she trudged away into the biting wind. She was pretty sure her ship had been spotted as it streaked through the atmosphere, but she could do nothing for it now. Through the driving snow, she spotted a vast stone edifice carved into the side of the cliff she was approaching. She fought the wind and made it inside. Her cloak dripped moisture onto the stone floor, the sound echoing hollowly in the dim space. She crept into the darkness, closing down on her Force connection as much as possible. She didn't dare light a lamp or a glow rod, relying only on her Force sense to guide her. She felt more than heard someone move behind her. Whirling, she stared into the darkness as her hands drifted towards her sabers. A brilliant red blade came slicing out of the darkness, and Callista barely raised her own in time. The light of his blade dimly illuminated the man's face. A second came at her, and now she fought harder. "What do you want, Jedi?" One of the Sith spat the name like a curse as he circled her. Callista glared at him. "I am responsible for killing one of your brothers." This caused both of them to attack her with renewed intensity, and Callista was hard-pressed to defend herself. The cold was slowing her down. One of the Sith backhanded her across the face with his saber hilt, and she crumpled to the floor, out cold. They dragged her limp body down the corridor and dumped her unceremoniously in front of their master. She stirred and started, fighting against the grip as she realized who he was. "Leave us!" the Sith Lord bellowed. They released her, and she stumbled, her legs having gone numb. Before departing, one of the sentries presented him with her sabers, and that of Mephisto, which she had also been carrying. With a look of disappointment at the saber of his fallen brother, he turned again to the Jedi. "'Tis a shame, but such are the ways of the Sith. He was not strong enough." "Why are you here, Jedi? Answer truthfully," he said as he slowly clenched his fist. She swallowed. "I feel that much was left unfinished from my encounter with him. I felt it necessary to deal with it personally." Drawing her cloak close about her, she gazed back at him. Slowly, he raised his hand into the air, and with it, the Jedi followed. He chuckled. "So, how do you desire to settle this? Challenge another Dark Lord? I warn you, I've been around just a while longer." Clenching his fist a little more, he now made sure that she was starting to be unable to breathe. She clawed at her throat, struggling for air. Shaking her head in answer to his question, she managed to speak past the grip restricting her air, her voice coming out as a strangled gasp. "I only want to know why." Tears flowed down her face again as she thought back over that fateful battle. He released his hold, and she fell back to the floor. "If knowledge is all you seek, then knowledge is what you shall receive." He took a long breath and then continued. "Mephisto was sent on a spying mission. No one was supposed to be harmed, at least that was not the intention. My guess is that he got a little too involved." She nodded warily, massaging her throat a little. "My master followed him, and Mephisto did not take well to it." She trailed off, remembering his comment at the start of their final battle. "He obviously thought your master a threat, but he couldn't destroy that threat, could he?" Shaking her head again, she continued. "He underestimated me, thought he could take on both of us himself." The old Sith grinned. We are proud, and sadly, sometimes that pride leads to idiocy. But you killed him in a fit of anger and hatred. You ended his life. She looked like she wanted to refute that for a moment, but then she nodded, merely looking at the floor. He clapped his hands, and 3 other Sith entered the room. Please escort this one to an acceptable room. Her eyes locked with his, a hint of fear in them for the first time. What's to be done with me? You will be dealt with later. Until then, please meditate on what has been said. He flicked his fingers, and the 3 Sith ignited their sabers and gestured towards the door. After a moment, she felt herself being lifted to her feet. Shaking them off, she walked between them, the 3 Sith following her from the room. Okay. Wait just a minute here. I do have some chat commands down in my description box below if anybody is interested. Please use them sparingly, but you may use them. If you're curious about any information about the story that we're reading, you can use the story fact command. And if I use a word, maybe not in this story, but the next one or two, if I use a word that is not familiar to you, please feel free to use the translate command and I will try and translate it for you. Alright. Okay. It doesn't feel right, Stefan thought as he looked up at the night sky from the porch of his home. Callista was still feeling something from the battle she fought on Corellia. It wasn't grief for her slain master, of that he was sure. But there was something else that was still lingering. He couldn't put his finger on it, but it was there, dark and brooding. And with the Vothans walking out of the Senate and several others who backed their ideas for power, things were coming to a head. Stefan feared that it was going to become very bloody. And with Vane controlling things, it only makes it worse. The concern coming off of you is overwhelming, Stefan, Einar said as he walked up to the porch railing. With things that are happening, Stefan began to say, I don't think this was the time for young Callista to run to find a sense of closure. I fear she may be walking into a trap. I'll find her, Einar said as he reassured his friend. I'll find her. One of the Sith adepts shoved open a heavy door. In here, Jedi, he hissed. She spared him a glance and stepped through the doorway. It slammed shut behind her, and she heard a clang as a bar was placed across it. The room was bare except for a simple sleep pallet in one corner. Settling herself in the middle of the floor, she sank into the force, reaching for calm. She could feel the Sith on the other side of the door, but she left them alone. The battle came to her mind once more. She could not put it out of her thoughts even after all this time. It was part of who she was. She remembered well the look in his eyes as she had approached, her purpose clear. She had indeed been walking a very fine line that day. She sank deeper into herself, remembering what Master Card had told her a few days ago. Callista, due to recent events, I have placed a locator beacon in the sole of one of your boots. If she should ever come into a situation you cannot deal with alone, you only have to activate it, and one of us will find you. His voice faded from her thoughts, and she reached into the heel of her boot, using the force to activate the beacon. Not even 3 seconds had passed when her guards burst into the room, their sabers blazing to life. Where is it? One snarled. Callista rose carefully to her feet, staring back at him. I don't know what you're talking about. She stood very still as he ran a scanner over her. It beeped when he reached her feet. Remove your boots, he commanded. She yanked her boots off and handed them to him. He then pulled the heel off of the left one, exposing the transmitter, which he pulled out and smashed under the heel of his own foot. There are penalties for lying, Jedi. She backed away from him as she sensed his intent. The other 2 grabbed her arms to keep her still. His movements were swift. He drew his hand back and punched her in the face. She could feel something break as pain blossomed in her jaw. The pain was the last thing she felt as she passed out. And that is the end of chapter 1. Like I said, the chapters in the first couple of stories are a little short, so bear with me. I wrote a lot of these back in 2000, 2002, so it's been a long time. So still working through some stuff and polishing them up a little bit. But I do appreciate everybody joining me for story time this evening. I'm really glad that I'm able to share these with all of you. Something that I've been working on for a really long time, so I'm really glad that I have the opportunity to share it all. Chapter 2. Einar saluted Stefan as he walked up the ramp. The Valiant was prepped for takeoff, so he sat down in the chair while the ship rose out of the underground hangar. He looked at the scanner, trying to pick up her ion trail. There was a faint trail. Great, so she could be anywhere in that quadrant of the galaxy. He oriented the ship to her ion trail and set up a jump across the core in the same direction she had gone. This might take a while, he thought, as he pulled the lever and the ship entered hyperspace. A while indeed. She awoke to find herself sprawled across the cot in her cell. The cold air seeped up from the stone, leaving her chilled. Shivering, she pulled her robe close and curled up on the small cot. Her jaw still throbbed, and the cold made it ache. Not knowing what the Sith planned for her, she tried to sink into a short healing trance. She gritted her teeth against the pain as she could feel her jaw slowly start to repair itself. She didn't dare put up her pain block. She needed to learn to deal with it. She shivered again, but not from the cold. A presence invaded her mind, and she knew who it was. Healing yourself, Jedi? She could hear his laughter in her mind. I'll have none of that while you're here. She heard him laugh once more, and then nothing. It was as if she was blind. The Force was simply not there. Her first reaction was to panic, but then Stefan's lessons came flooding back to her. Remain calm, for there are more things at your disposal than just the Force. Use all your senses. Taking deep breaths to slow her racing heart, she tried to calm down and prepare herself for whatever was to come. The following morning, Callista was roughly awakened as her guards fed her a small meal of rations. One tossed her boots at her. Put these on and come with us. Silently, she drew them on and followed them from the room. They led her back to the room from the previous day. The Sith took in her slightly rumpled appearance. Had trouble sleeping? He asked innocently. She glared at him, for they both knew what he meant. He stood, cracking his knuckles, and began to speak. First things first, allow me to introduce myself. I am the Dark Lord of the Sith, Caib Benas, and knowing of your victory over Mephisto, I would be willing to take you on as my apprentice. Her face must have betrayed her shock, for he grinned. She shook her head. I came here for answers, not to become your student. He cracked an evil grin, and his eyes narrowed. You do understand. If you refuse, I cannot allow you to leave here alive. He flicked his fingers, and his lightsaber sped into his hand. She straightened, setting her jaw. Then so be it. She dropped into a combat stance, even though she lacked a lightsaber. This is unfitting. He drew out another lightsaber from his long black cloak and tossed it to her. The hilt landed near her feet. Now, fight me or die. Picking up the saber carefully, she recognized it instantly as Mephisto's blade. The blade felt alien in her hands, but a saber was a saber at this point. She settled into a high guard, the crimson blade springing to life over her head. Yes, that fits you quite nicely. He steadied his blade at a right angle to his side, an unusual style. Then he darted forward with a loud yell, holding his blade tight to his side, and took a hard swing at the young Jedi's head. Her saber snapped down, her reflexes quick. She barely caught his in time, their blades intersecting 2 inches in front of her face. She had to rely solely on training and instinct, for the force still eluded her. He pushed his blade forward, but realizing he wouldn't get anywhere, he jumped back and violently pushed his hand forward, using the force to propel the young Jedi backwards. Is this what you want? To die here? You do realize I am holding back quite a lot. She caught herself barely before slamming hard into the wall. It doesn't matter what I want. It matters only what the Force wills. He rushed towards her again. Why remain a slave to the Force, serving it when you can free yourself and make it serve you? He shoved at her with the Force, sending her flying across the room once more. She caught herself yet again. I'm no slave to the Force or anyone. She shoved off from the wall and raced to meet him, her blade crashing into his, sparks flying as it slid down and hit his hand. He drew his hand back in agony and kicked the young Jedi in the knee, causing him an opening to evade away from her. A curse escaped her lips as her knee gave way. Not again, she thought. She fought back the pain and wavered on her feet momentarily before she regained her footing. I underestimated you, young Jedi, but this is your final warning, and don't worry about my hand. He pulled back his glove to reveal it was made of a metallic alloy and merely charred at the surface. You weren't the first one to hit it. She brought her saber around again, settling into a middle guard, the blade diagonal across her body. Locking eyes with him, she asked, Why kill me? What could that possibly accomplish except to get the Jedi after you? Why kill you? He said with a chuckle. My dear, do you really think I would believe the Jedi would have authorized your visit to Korriban? I'm not stupid. You've left without proper authorization. Even if anyone comes after you, I am more than able to dispatch a search party of young knights. She paused at that, considering, and then she leaped at him, her blade striking for his neck. He whipped his head aside, and while he was distracted, she reached for her blades where they hung on his belt. She snagged one of them. She dropped before whipping her blades around and slicing into his leg. The old Sith yelled and kicked the young Jedi in the face, knocking her down. Remember the hand? Why don't I tell you why I was made a Dark Lord? Only my chest and head are still organic, though it will cost me mere repair bills, wretch. But if that is the way you wish to play... He dropped his lightsaber and thrust his metallic hand forward and before clenching the fingers tightly and cutting off any chance of being able to breathe. And then he said, Realize you were outclassed before I crush your internal organs into bits and make you vomit them out. She dropped both blades and they clattered across the room. She struggled to pull air into her screaming lungs. Futilely, she lashed out with her fist, catching him in the throat. He took the pain in the throat like anyone would, not very well, as he threw the young Jedi onto the floor with as much force as he could muster. Then he flicked his wrist, bringing both lightsabers back to his cloak. Are you angry? Do you hate me? She crashed to the floor, curling into a ball from the pain. She struggled to keep the rage and agony from boiling over, yet failed miserably. Sobs racked her body as she lay at his feet. He walked away from her body, laughing as he clapped his hands. As before, the 3 guards entered the room. Let this one rot in the same room as last time for a bit longer. If she survives the injuries, we'll see how things progress. Callista didn't even fight this time as she was dragged away. Her only thought was the pain. That's a cute emote demon. Oh, wow. Sorry, the entire right side of my face is numb, so it's just really hard to do much of anything. So I apologize again if I'm slurring any words. I'm attempting to not do that. Alright. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. Anne! Hi, Anne! Welcome to Storytime, Anne. Glad you could join us this evening. Alright. That's okay. I appreciate the lurktato. Alright. Her guards dumped her in her cell once more, and none too gently. As she crawled towards the cot, she heard a second bar being placed across the door. Her arms ached from dragging herself across the room. With her last bit of energy, she hauled herself onto the cot and passed out. She lost all sense of time. Even her meals were irregular. Her diet now consisted solely of bread and water as the Sith sought to break her even further. The knee had stiffened, and it was agony to even move it. Sleep did not come easily to her as it was filled with pain and nightmares. Her treatment at the hands of her guards steadily worsened. They hardly spoke to her, only to command her to do something. The way they woke her up was to dump her from the cot, having no concern for her injuries. One brusquely shoved a hard piece of bread into her hands while the others looked on. "Eat," he ordered. He stood there with his arms folded until she had finished, and then he left. Frankly, she was surprised she wasn't dead. She probably should be. She had snuck into the base of her own will, bringing this on herself. Why did I come here in the first place? She thought. It was stupid, and now I have to deal with the consequences. Sitting up carefully, she flexed her injured knee experimentally. It was all she could do to keep from screaming in pain. The kneecap had been dislocated and would have to be put back in place. Clenching her teeth, she set to the grim task. She held her knee steady with one hand and shoved hard with the other. The pain was enough to make her pass out again. The Sith watched her via the cameras hidden in her cell. He had to admit, she had guts. Not many would take on a Sith Lord such as himself and then be able to set their own injuries. Her determination was apparent, and he knew his task would be difficult. Her control was surprising, and he reevaluated his opinion of her as she set her own injuries without a sound. Even without the Force, she could do things most Jedi would avoid. Her dreams changed from agony to memories of her lessons with Master Card. She clung to them, for it was all she had. They were her only source of calm amid all of this. Her strongest memory was the day she had reached a new level in her connection to the Force. She still felt nothing of it, but the calm that she had felt was still there. Sitting in her cell, there was nothing much to do, so she turned her attention to regaining her fighting skills. Her knee was still weak, but it gave her something to do. She submerged herself in it, and the movements themselves providing a sorely needed focus. Alright. And chapter 3. Just as a little aside before I start reading chapter 3, like I said, these chapters are short, so if you guys want, I can stop at chapter 3, or I can continue to chapter 4. Your choice, chat. What would you like to do? Anybody else? Let's see. Sorry, I'm attempting to set up a poll and it's not working. Please speak up. 3 chapters? Or 4? Or more? Let me know. Yeah, I apparently can't do a poll right now. I did just try. Please let me know what you would like to do. Well, if you do, we can write in if you like. Give me just a minute. I'm gonna go deal with my coughing fit. I'll be right back. Okay. Sorry about that. Decided to go into a coughing fit, apparently. Alright. Has anybody decided? Would you like more than 3 chapters? Would you like less? Well, we can do 3 chapters or we can do more. Those are our options. Alright. Chapter 3. I'm sorry, Stefan, but I'm still looking. It's like she disappeared into thin air. I've tried meditating, but whenever I try to locate her, I'm blocked. Anna reported over the comm. The worried face of Stefan looked back at him. I fear for the worst. I feel it in my gut that she's in trouble. I can't even tell if she's still alive, Stefan said gravely. Troubling times, these are. Anna only nodded as he dropped out of hyperspace again. He had been traveling for almost a week now. A few days ago, an emergency beacon went off somewhere on the other side of the galaxy, but he hadn't been able to pinpoint it since the signal only transmitted for a few seconds. Anything there? Stefan asked. Anna could see his wife sitting behind him. They were both worried about young Callista's safety. Nothing. No sign of her transponder beacon or force presence. I don't know what to think, Stefan. Anna shook his head and started to calculate another set of jump coordinates. At this point, he was randomly selecting locations, and this jump would take him to, well, Yavin is a known system at least. But when he looked at the star map, something went off inside his head. A system close to Yavin. A system closed off from the Republic. Korriban. Stefan, I might have something. Stefan looked intrigued as Einar did some final calculations on his Nava computer. Yes, it all fits. The ion trail, the beacon, and she might even have a reason to go there. Well, will you tell me, or do I have to guess? Because that could take a while. Anna looked at the column screen and then went back to the Nava computer. Stefan, she went to Korriban. Nobody said anything for a few seconds, and then, you can't go in there on your own, Einar. I can be there in less than 4 days. Einar turned his chair towards the comm unit once more. Stefan, she's been there for days. She can't wait 4 more, if she's even still alive. I'm going in. I can handle it. Stefan nodded. All right, but be careful. I have a bad feeling about this. Do you think Bane's on Korriban? It would surprise me if he wasn't in the thick of this. If it's him, don't go up against him. I'm talking to you as a friend. We both know he's more powerful. Einar knew he was right, but it still was hard to accept. I'll just get her in and out. Don't worry. Stefan stood up and walked towards the screen. All right, old friend. Best of luck, and may the Force be with you. Einar saluted and then shut off the comm unit. He took a deep breath as he decided on his plan. Thankfully, he had brought his lightsaber, but he didn't have the rest of the proper gear. He pulled the lever, and the ship jumped to hyperspace on its way to Korriban. And Einar had to admit, he was a bit nervous. Kiev was at a loss. Everything he did to try and break Callista she recovered from, albeit slowly. She even took the treatment of her guards without complaint. This frustrated him, for she would make a fine addition to the order. Her spirit was strong, and he was sure that breaking her would not be an easy task. At some point he knew that someone was bound to come looking for her, and he wanted to be ready. Her cell was not easy to access from the central part of the base, for it was located on a sub-level. Her body was already weakened from her injuries and the lack of food, and he felt that the guards would have no trouble. Even considering the change in her presence, he still felt that her injuries would slow her down enough that the guards could keep her in line. 24 hours later. The Valiant slowly descended into the rich forest. The running lights were off, and he hoped he was far enough out to avoid the perimeter sensors. He dressed in what he could find resembling infiltration gear. A black flight suit, engineering gloves, and boots sufficed, as well as a pull-down mask. He attached his lightsaber to his flight suit and strapped a blaster and a comlink to his hip, attaching the tiki blade that Ari had given him all those years ago to his right arm. This will do. He walked towards the ramp and lowered it onto the ground before stretching his senses forward. He couldn't feel any threats, only small life forms scurrying about. He locked the ship down and took off towards the temple. He knew this rotten planet far too well. All the briefings and history lessons came back to him as he ran through the dense forest like a Corellian razor dog. 30 minutes later, he arrived at the large stone building. Twilight was just upon it, but he could still see the markings all over the exterior stone, and he made sure not to read them. He buried himself in the trees and watched the guards circle the entrance. He had diminished his force presence as he landed on this rotten planet, one of the advantages of being trained in infiltration. But the downside was that he couldn't sense anything in the building. But something was definitely up. The Sith were in numbers and protecting the building. Right now, he wished Stefan was with him. He waited, and minutes turned into hours. He sat motionless, watching the guards. The night was dark, but the Force helped enhance his sight. The guards' movements became slower. They were tiring, and there were few of them around. 3, maybe 4 now. Anna rose out of the bushes, slowly moving over the field, his movements slow and careful, making sure not to make a sound. The guards were down to 3, 1 by the entrance and 2 by either side of the front of the building. Einar crouched and moved in close, his force presence barely perceptible. He winked. He closed on even further, before moving in closer, his eyes never leaving the young Sith guarding the entrance. It was now or never. The shroud of darkness concealed him as he leaped forward, grabbing the young man's throat, the other hand over his mouth, and wrestled him to the ground, muffling his screams. Then he applied pressure to the young man's windpipe until his eyes rolled up into his head and the Sith went limp. Einar slowly pulled the unconscious form inside the entrance and placed him against the wall in the shadows, concealing him from the entrance. He then stopped and listened. Nothing. The other guards didn't even sense him. Anar unclipped the lightsaber from the Sith belt and put it in a pouch inside his flight suit. Then he unsheathed his tiki blade and held it backwards as he crept down the hallway. Torches lit up the tunnel, and he hoped no one would come looking into the hallway while he passed. That would be bad. He slowed down as he reached the corner and looked carefully around. A vast room with tables filled with rich foods, pictures, and symbols on the walls, lit by large torches and fire burning in various places along the walls. He felt cold. The dark side is overwhelming in here. He wanted to throw his shackles away and burst with energy, but his Jedi training helped him resist the lure. He shook it off and looked into the room again. No one was there. Great. The only way forward is through a very bright room. He ducked behind the wall, sheathing his tiki blade again, and drew his lightsaber in one swift movement, but didn't ignite it. He wasn't sure what to do next. The last time he did something like this, he was a young man, a young Jedi Knight, back when Kevin was still alive. But now he was alone in the stronghold of the Sith Order. What in the blazes was he even doing? Hey, Cypher. Welcome in. Yes, I am, thank you. I am reading through chapter 3 of the second story. Good to see you. Even without the Force, she could tell something was going on. The guards had stopped coming in to check on her almost 12 hours ago. Though the door was heavy, she could catch muffled voices from the other side, and she knew there were more than just 3 guarding her now. Looking around the room, she spotted a loose chunk of stone lying on the floor. It looked to have chipped from one of the parts of the wall. The shard was twice the length of her hand. Picking it up, she carefully ran it back and forth across the rough floor, honing it to a rough edge. Certainly not the most elegant weapon, she thought, but it will have to do. She hid it carefully in the folds of her tunic. She could not have had better timing, for the door to her cell burst open and the guards rushed in. There were 5 now. All held their sabers ready, but unlit. Something was definitely going on. Get up, Jedi, one hissed at her. She didn't move a muscle. He growled and flicked his hand at 2 of his companions. They stalked over and yanked her bodily from the cot. She exploded into movement, her actions a blur like those of a Corellian sand panther. 2 Sith fell before the other 3 even realized what was happening. She shoved the 2 Sith off of her, and they were dead before they hit the floor. She then charged the others. They didn't even have time to raise their sabers, and she took yet another down with her improvised blade. She felt a weight slam into her back, and then she slammed to the floor. The Sith's hot breath brushed her cheek as he spoke into her ear. Try that again, and I will kill you where you stand, orders or not. He trailed off and left the threat hanging in the air like a noose ready to strangle her. She squirmed, trying to get free from his grip, and he slammed her against the floor. Don't move, he roared. He jerked her arms up behind her at a painful angle, and she felt him snap stun cuffs around her wrists, jerking her to her feet before they dragged her from the cell. You know what? I'm going to read one more chapter because that, well, do you guys want that much of a cliffhanger? Because I can leave it there. I could go ahead and leave it there. If you guys want that much of a cliffhanger. What do you think? Yes? No? Talk to me, chat. What you want? I can keep going, or I can leave you with a massive cliffhanger. Your choice. That's not helpful. Well, I don't think I'll be able to finish the story tonight, but I might be able to get through one more chapter. Talk to me, chat. What you want? Talk to me, chat. Cliffhanger? No cliffhanger? Your choice. I mean, it's still gonna be a little bit of a cliffhanger. Yeah, I can manage another chapter. I'm gonna scroll forward and see where that one ends. Give me a second. Yeah, actually, you know what? I'm gonna read chapter 4 because that's also a little bit of a cliffhanger, but not as much as this one. So. So I will read chapter 4. Alright. Oh, excuse me. Make sure you guys have water. Before I start reading chapter 4, if anybody in chat has any questions about the chapters that we've read so far, or even the story that I was reading last week, please let me know in chat if you have questions by using the story fact command, and I will gladly answer any questions that you have about this story, without spoilers as much as possible, of course. Or the previous story called Reflections of a Padawan. So please feel free to ask in chat. I'll chill out for a minute while you guys think about that. Do you have a question, Cypher? Oh. Okay. Well, if no one else does, I'm going to start reading chapter 4. But you can also, if you think of anything while we're reading, go ahead and drop the story fact command in chat at any point, and I will try to pay attention to that, and we can stop and discuss. So please feel free to ask questions. I like to tell people more about the stories. Love to share. So please feel free to ask if you have any questions at all. Alright. Chapter 4. Lord Vanass was outraged. He had spared her in hopes that he might convince her that there was more to the Force than just her narrow view of it. His glance flicked up as he noticed a commotion. The sentries parted to reveal 2 guards dragging her between them. They stalked into the hall and shoved her to her knees before him. As she brought her head up, he noticed bruises across her face and a dusty red mark across one cheek. He grinned, knowing immediately what had transpired. I see that you have regained your fighting spirit. Excellent. She looked back at him calmly. Something swirling behind her eyes that he couldn't identify. I never lost it. You're sure about this? Dylan Card asked as he finished loading up his gear into the shuttle. I've meditated on it since Einar's call, Stefan said as he started closing the boarding ramp. I feel that they're both going to be up against something larger than the 2 of them can handle. And you're sure it's Korriban? Dylan asked him as they walked towards the cockpit. It's not a question of being sure, Stefan said as he leaned back, but I feel something urgent that will happen there. Dylan nodded and brought the shuttle up off the ground on repulsors and started to clear orbit. When they got out of orbit and started heading to the jump point, Stefan entered the first set of coordinates that would take them to Korriban. Speed is of the essence, he thought to himself. Dylan waited until they were secured into hyperspace before he looked over at his father. You felt something? It was just a fleeting moment, Stefan said as he leaned back in the pilot's chair. In meditation, I felt Callista fighting to regain her control of the Force. It was only for a moment, but it was burning bright. But Korriban? It's been home to the Sith ever since the first war between the two groups started, maybe even longer, Stefan said quietly. I feel that is where this new chain of events has started. I won't know for certain until we get there. What he saw in her eyes made him pause. There was definitely more to her than he had first thought. She had a fire that he had not seen in one so young for a very long time. He gazed at her intently. How is it that you have such a drive for one so young? She thought a moment as she watched carefully for his reaction. Not many have crossed blades with Stefan Card and lived to tell the tale. I am one of his students. She paused and continued to watch him intently. He frowned as she mentioned the name, and his eyes took on a faraway look. It was through his lessons that I was able to fight back against what you were trying to do. With the last word, she surged to her feet. She felt the Force return to her for an instant as the shock overwhelmed him. In that single moment, her sabers flew back into her hands. The guards backed away from her twin blades, but not before one tried to slice off her hand. Twitching her wrist just slightly, she moved her hand just in time so that instead of severing her wrist like he had intended, he cut through the binders instead. She whirled, finding herself now free of the binders, yet still trapped in the middle of the room. Lord Van Ness rose to his feet, clapping mockingly. Well done, Jedi. She turned to look at him, but then turned her attention back to the guards as he snapped out an order. Destroy her! Einar moved slowly across the vast room, but if he remembered his history correctly, this place was a maze, many floors and sublevels, so he needed to do something stupid. He let go of the Force and let his senses expand fully, taking in everything and everyone in the temple. He was detectable now. He was just hoping they weren't paying attention. He tried to look for Callista's Force presence, his senses slowly scanning the floor that he was on. Then, suddenly, he felt a wave of Force energy, and Callista's presence was as clear to him as his own. Destroy her! Einar snapped his hilt upwards as he heard the muffled cry come from somewhere on this level, and he locked onto Callista's presence and took off running, igniting his blue blade as he ran. He ran until he came to a large wooden door. He could feel the raw power of the dark side beyond, and he ran through the door at full speed, the doors swinging open as he rushed into the room. He noticed Callista in the middle, fighting off two Sith, and a man who was unfamiliar to him sat on a throne on the other end. Stop! Einar yelled as he brought his blade up over his head, pointing it horizontally at the group while his other hand stretched forward, knocking the two men off of their feet and sending them crashing against the far wall. It was a lucky break since they didn't sense him coming. Callista looked up at him and then ran to his side. She looked absolutely terrible, pale, and her robes were torn and bloody, probably from days of torture. She reached his side in a moment, her two purple sabers at the ready, but she looked weak, tired. Master. Einar reached out with his free hand and laid it on her shoulder. Get behind me and watch the exit. She nodded and stepped back slowly, her fatigue almost taking over. Who do you think you are, Jedi? The man on the throne boomed as he stood gracefully, his words a mere hiss. Einar raised his saber in a guard position and slowly walked to the middle of the room, keeping the other two Sith in his peripheral vision. I am Master Algernon, and who might you be? Einar said mockingly with a grin. He could sense the anger building up in the man standing across from him, his face betraying his anger. I am the Dark Lord of the Sith, Caib Banas, he trailed off. Einar lowered his blade slowly, faking an opening. Dark Lord of the Sith? Einar said, and then laughed. I think not. The man leaped at him, lightsaber in hand, and he struck forcefully at Einar's torso, but he had been ready and blocked the strike elegantly, and then sidestepped before thrusting at the Sith's back, his blade searing his robes. The man fell past him and almost fell forward, but turned swiftly with the aid of the Force and held his blade in a diagonal guard, staring angrily at Einar. Wow, that was close. Are you sure you're a Dark Lord? Now let's drop the charade. Where's Bane? Einar asked, adding some steel to his voice. He could see a flicker in the Sith's eyes at the mention of Bane, but he didn't react any other way. You don't know what you're getting yourself into, Jedi, he growled. Einar just smiled as he saw the other two Sith adepts slowly move towards him, their sabers raised. Trouble? Einar sprang to the left, his blade crashing against the adepts as he forced his blade upwards and kicked the man with all his might in the stomach, sending him spiraling away. Then he moved as if in a Moncao ballet, edging backwards and swiping the blade back over his head to counter a strike aimed at his head. His blade intersected the red blade of the other Sith, and Einar let himself drop back into the ground before turning it into a roll that took him around the other man's legs, cutting him in two. He came out of the roll at the Sith Lord's side and received a fist directly into his jaw for his trouble, which sent him stumbling. His head spun fiercely from the impact. Hey, no stuffing the gloves with Farrakreet. That's illegal. Callista ran to his side and put a hand under his shoulder, steadying him. Are you alright? Einar nodded as he picked himself back up and shook his head. The Sith laughed at him. That was quite unnecessary. Chris was one of my best students, he said, pointing at the Sith, who was now in two pieces on the floor. The other adept came to his side, his blade humming loudly as he twisted it repeatedly in the air before settling into a guard position. Then they both attacked. Einar raised his blade just in time to fend off the Sith Lord's attack and somersaulted backwards, landing a few feet away. Callista's two blades were moving quickly, driving the other adept away from them. She's good, Einar thought as he recovered and ran towards the Sith, his own blade swinging into a high arc, intersecting with the Dark Lord's. The energy crackled as their blades met, sending sparks into the air. Einar used all of his strength to push the blade away, trying to gain an opening, but the Sith sidestepped and shut his blade down, which caused Einar to lose his footing and fall forward, right into the Sith Lord's grip. His massive right arm took a hold of Einar's throat, and he lifted him easily off the ground, closing off his ability to breathe. Einar struggled to break himself free, his hand trying to pry the Sith Lord's fingers off of his throat, but without success. He was too strong. His arm, mechanical, yes, that was it. It was dead to the Force, nothing there but metals and servos. Einar tried kicking him, but the massive Sith didn't flinch as he continued to strangle Einar, who, with the help of the Force, managed to keep his throat from collapsing like a straw. Callista was being kept at bay by the other Sith. She couldn't get to him. Einar's vision started tunneling, and he saw black spots swirling at the edges of his sight. He was going to die soon. He tried to struggle, his hands grabbing at the Sith's arm, trying to find a weak spot. And there it was, his shoulder, where flesh met metal. In a last effort, Einar shoved himself forward, smashing his head into the Sith's forehead with his hand, while his hand went for the Sith's shoulder and withdrew the tiki blade before thrusting it with all of his might into the man's shoulder. The Sith Lord screamed in agony as his grip on Einar loosened and Einar broke free, falling to the floor, fighting to catch his breath. Blood poured from the wound in his shoulder as the Sith drew the blade free and threw it to the ground. A moment's distraction, which was long enough for Einar to stand and call his saber back to his own hand. He looked over towards Callista, who had also gotten lucky as the adept's concentration was broken by his master's distress. And Callista had taken advantage of it, leaving the adept dead on the floor. She looked almost as bad as Einar felt. The Sith was bleeding badly by this point, and growling with the ferocity of a krayt dragon, and then called his own saber back to his hand. Yeah, maybe a little bit. I don't think Bacta's gonna help now, though. He looked over at Callista, who... Oops. Sorry. Einar got back into position, ready for another attack, but the Sith Lord grinned as he pointed the saber at the gaping wound and started cauterizing it himself. The smell of burned flesh filled the room, and Einar grimaced at the blatant brutality. Callista, go! She looked at him, confused. Now, Callista, head north, get to the ship. If I'm not back in 10 minutes after you get there, take off and contact Master Card. She looked at him like she wanted to refuse, but she shut her sabers down and ran out of the room, away from the coming battle. Don't want her to see you die, Jedi? Einar just smiled. His strength had returned to him, and he took a ready stance that said, "Come and get me." The Sith Lord looked at him, fire running his eyes as the blood stopped pouring from his wound. Einar just shook his head, grinning. You really must hate yourself. The Sith laughed and attacked with blinding speed, and for a moment things seemed to slow down as Einar let himself go over... Hold on, let me read that again. The Sith laughed and attacked with blinding speed, and for a moment things seemed to slow down as Einar released himself to the will of the Force, and he ceased to be Einar Algernon and became an instrument of the Force. Their blades crashed again and again, sparks flying as they both moved with incredible speed and accuracy, effectively blocking each other's moves perfectly. You would make a fine Sith. You fight with passion, the Dark Lord said between strikes. Einar didn't answer, but reacted by stepping back as the Force helped him sense the Sith's next move. Einar raised his saber high, just in time to block the lethal lightning shooting from the Sith's fingers, deflecting it into the ceiling, which sent shards of stone and dust falling down around them. The Sith raised his hands again. This time Einar managed to deflect most of it, but a stray lightning bolt got his hand, and he dropped his saber before falling to the ground as the lightning connected with his body. This partially paralyzed him. The Sith walked over to Einar, increasing the ferocity of the Force lightning, and Einar screamed as the energy surged around him. Venas looked down at him, grinning, and then raised his hands again, and for the final blow. Einar's body was unable to resist, but the will of the Force was still with him. As the Sith shot another blast of lightning towards him, Einar's lightsaber came flying through the air, blade ignited, and intercepted the lightning centimeters from the Sith's hands, and deflected the energy right into the Sith Lord's face, blinding him. The Sith screamed with agony as he dropped to his knees and held his hands over his eyes, blood pouring down his face. Einar climbed to his feet, every fiber of his being screamed. Every fiber of his being... Hold on one second. I lost my spot. Thank you. Okay, there we go. Einar climbed to his feet. Every fiber of his being screamed as he slowly walked over to the Sith, who now lay sprawled on the floor, and kicked him in the torso. The Sith Lord convulsed with pain and let his hands drop to the floor. Where his eyes had been now were two gaping holes. Einar's breath was hollow and sore as he stood there looking at the monster, now beaten and bleeding. Einar called his saber back to his hand. The handle was all charred and black, and ignited his blade. Venas stiffened as he heard the distinctive sound. I surrender, he said gravely, almost pleading. Einar gritted his teeth. His hair burned, his skin red and boiling, and he wanted to make the Sith pay. Without thinking, Einar raised his blade and thrust it down through the man's chest, right through the man's heart, as if his muscles could respond. He would have smiled. The Dark Lord of the Sith was dead. The gaping hole in his chest and the dark eye socket sent a chill down Einar's spine. What have I done? He thought, as his body shook, both out of shock and from the coldness he felt from watching the man lying on the floor. The man he murdered. Alright. Alrighty. We'll find out. I think I'm going to stop there for the evening. Alright, everybody. Does anybody have any questions? We got through 4 chapters tonight. That's a lot. Oh, thanks, Cypher. A lot of these I wrote back when I was 18 or 20, so I'm kind of having to go back and do a bit of editing. And I'm actually doing a bit of self-editing as I read, because it's been so long, so I'm trying to clean it up and make it flow a little bit better. Also, yeah, I'm drinking with a straw because the side of my face is still numb. Because I went to the dentist this afternoon. And they had to do a couple of fillings, so I have one side of my face numb. Yeah. It makes it hard to do much. So I have to drink with a straw, among other things. I tried drinking out of a glass normally, and that was a disaster, so it didn't work. But yes, Cypher or anyone else in chat, if you are just now coming into stream and you would like to catch up on the stories we've been reading, you can check out my VODs from last week, or you can check out my Archive of Our Own link. I think they're in order over there. Yeah, so thank you, Cypher. I really appreciate that. And thank you, everyone, for joining me this evening. Give me just a second over here. Seeing if... I am trying to pick a raid target, so give me just a second. Why is she not? She's not showing on my list for some reason. Give me a second. Alright, yeah, we'll go raid her. Thank you, everybody, for joining me this evening as we continue our reading. I do plan to stream again on Sunday, same time. I haven't decided yet if we're going to continue the story, or I may turn that into a writing stream. I have a later story that I'm working on, so I might stream a little bit while I'm writing. So I will let you guys know what I plan to do. So if you'd like to join me on Sunday, I should be live at the same time. Let's go say hi to Anne. And thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really appreciate your company. Let's go hang out with Anne. Here we go. Oh, give me 1 second. There we go. That is my raid command. Or you could do Survivor Squad raid too, that works. Everybody ready? Let's go. Get your favorite emotes. Let's go say hi to Anne. Thanks everybody. Have a great night.